Now legendary across the world, it was the last great Mayan city, Chichén Itzá. Located in the southeastern state of Yucatán in Mexico, this sprawling cosmopolitan city attracted thousands of men and women in its heyday, as much as Paris at the time.
It has opportunities, it's exciting. This was the place to be.
The sublime pyramid of El Castillo radiated.
When you would emerge from that building, you were looking out over this enormous plaza, 20,000, 30,000 people. Whoever was the person wielding that position would have been godlike themselves.
A pyramid that hides a strange secret at its core. A temple that's forbidden to the public.
The leader stood in this very spot to receive energies from the celestial world and the underworld. To the Mayas, this spot is therefore the most sacred place in all of Chichén Itzá.
And a giant cave upon which it may have been built.
If that is true, it's going to be the foundational trait of all this city. They must have done everything from that cenote, and the archaeological elements there must contain valuable information to understand the city.
This city-state was brutally ruled by a powerful military guild that never thought twice about spilling blood.
Literally, you could stand here and count the number of human sacrifices. Probably in this case, there would have been hundreds, if not 1,000 or more skulls here.
From human sacrifices to ingenious architecture, experts are about to take you deep within this incredible city-state, which marked both the zenith and the downfall of one of history's greatest civilizations. By the 11th century AD in southeast Mexico, Chichén Itzá had reached its apex. It is the most powerful Mayan city in all of Mesoamerica. Built in the heart of the jungle, the city spreads over 3 kilometers. It includes dozens of lavish monuments. Among them is El Castillo, a pyramid standing 30 meters high, dedicated to the powerful snake god Kukulkan. It represents the city's religious center. To the north lies the Great Ball Court, a 170-meter-long playing field where 2 teams compete as part of bloody rituals. Towering over the canopy is El Caracol, one of the first observatories ever built by mankind. Its unique architecture allows for incredibly precise measurements of the movements of the stars. And finally, the Temple of the Warriors, with its vast covered arcade and its 200 columns, headquarters the ruling masters of Chichén Itzá. It is a cosmopolitan city of nearly 50,000 inhabitants, as much as Paris at the time. A truly unique city that hides a world of mysteries within its heart. It is built over a network of underground tunnels that span kilometers, and caves so deep that even oxygen is sparse.
We are in the heart of Earth. We are in the underworld. We are on the dark side of the universe. And yeah, this represented fertility, you know. The modern Maya from Chiapas said that the stalactites, and sometimes are dropping, are the breasts of the earth. They said that the stalagmites that grow on the floor are the phallus. And when they get together and form a column, the earth is copulating to make life happen. So here we are on the sanctum sanctorum of Maya religion and ritual and beliefs.
If Chichén Itzá was built on top of caves, it's because they were essential to the Mayas. In their eyes, they represented the world of the dead, while also being the source of life. They were the stage for their bloody ceremonies and human sacrifices, when a priest would use an obsidian blade to carve out his victim's heart to satisfy the gods and assure the city would prosper.
We have probably the earliest date in Chichén Itzá from this cave. It's a piece of charcoal taken on the mud of one of the walls that the Maya built to seal the cave. So probably a lot of the development of Chichén started on this very cave.
It was hence from great depths that the world's largest Maya city and its incredible pyramids rose to prominence. The year was 500 AD. In the heart of the Yucatán jungle, on wild virgin territory, men built the first huts and christened their new village, Chichén Itzá. No one knows where these first inhabitants came from, but they were part of the powerful Maya civilization, whose cities flourished from the highlands of the Pacific coast to the shores of the Caribbean Sea. Meanwhile, to the west, the Mexican highlands were dominated by the most powerful city in Mesoamerica, Teotihuacan. Choosing to build a city here was no accident. This vegetal desert, the porous surface of which allows no lake or river to form, is actually home to an abundant source of fresh water, the cenote sagrado. This enormous natural reservoir is 60 meters wide and 40 meters deep, formed by limestone that eroded with rainwater. A water source seen by the Mayas as a gift from the gods.
I do believe that the first builders of Chichén Itzá came here because of the cenotes. And this one in particular, the most important sacred cenotes in the Maya area. I believe this is the mother of all cenotes. If we're talking about ritualism, if we're talking about cosmogony, this cenote was used to give offerings to the gods.
Many of the offerings which have been found within the sacrificial cenote come from cities in the southern lowlands. So it is very likely that people went to Chichén Itzá as pilgrims.
Pilgrims that would strengthen the ranks of the Chichén Itzá population. And that's not all, because 700 kilometers away, a terrible drought struck the Maya plains. Tikal, Caracol, and Palenque, large cities with tens of thousands of inhabitants, experienced a mass exodus. Their all-powerful leaders couldn't soothe the anger of the gods.
We are understanding in archaeology is that communities, cities, villages are not forever. So maybe these people had to leave and they resettle a new place to live.
So we see a general rise in the Yucatan in general of cities and communities in the period 7 to 8, 8 to 900. Chichén was one of these places.
With the big cities crumbling in the south and given its sacred cenote, the odds were in Chichén Itzá's favor to become a significant city. As a new order started to take shape, it began to work its way to the top. Back in the 8th century AD, Chichén Itzá only comprised a few basic structures made of adobe and wood. Competition was ferocious. Uxmal, 130 kilometers to the west, was leading the way. The city had undertaken an ambitious architectural plan. Temples, palaces, and pyramids were built to ensure its local supremacy. In the battle to be the best, Chichén Itzá had no choice. It had to start building.
Monumental architecture is something that human beings do. It reinforces religious ideology. It reinforces our identity as a people. Who are we? But also, it shows power to build these things, the energy to do it, the economic power to do it, and also the power of the state to create these kinds of structures.
Buildings that, unlike the people's humble dwellings, were made to last because the people of Chichén Itzá had a highly desirable resource: limestone. A large deposit was found right outside the city.
It looks like they were carving this stone, which it was going to be probably a serpent head. Can you see the shape of the serpent here? You can see the mouth, the eye still visible somewhere. But it looks like when they were walking it, it breaks. So they leave it. They leave the work unfinished. The hard work was not to extract it. The hard work was to carry it all the way to the site. You imagine how many people they needed and a special technique. Maybe they push this stone through rolls of wood, logs, so it could be manageable. But it's amazing to believe the big city of Chichén Itzá is built with big pieces of stone like this one.
Without the help of pack animals and using the sole strength of their arms, the Mayas crossed the jungle carrying the heavy stones for hundreds of meters. That's how the first pyramid was built, El Osario. At 12 meters high, it was built atop a 25-meter deep cave, which is connected to the temple by a staircase. It's a symbolic doorway to the underworld. Further south, Las Monjas, a 50-meter-long complex, was the heart of the city. Its upper level was home to private apartments reserved for the elite, with long, narrow rooms. The Mayas were not familiar with keystones. The technique, which originated in the Western world, allows to distribute weight along the length of a supporting wall to create large open vaults. But the Mayas couldn't use corbelled vaults to distribute the weight. So even the elitist homes were cramped. Such was the price of durability.
This construction system is extremely durable. It's over 1,000 years old. We can still see part of the paint that decorated the walls. This is a sign that their system worked perfectly. If their civilization had continued to develop, perhaps the Mayas would have figured out the solution, much like the Western world did.
Below, buildings with impressive puuk-style sculpted facades, characteristic of the region, may well have housed the city's most powerful members.
Over the doorway, this feathery, kind of solary ring that's surrounding this individual, who's probably a high-ranking elite lord, if not one of the kings of Chichén. So here the Lord sits above in his throne or in this feathery space that's symbolizing an entrance into the underworld or a sacred mountain.
A ruler used Las Monjas as his palace. A pediment over one of the doors is inscribed with Maya hieroglyphics that provide precious clues to his identity.
It's very common in Maya culture for the buildings or rooms to be inscribed with the name of their patron or the person who is tasked with an important ceremony. Here, everything seems to indicate this was someone very important back then. Pakal.
Kaku Pakal, the first ruler of Chichén Itzá, a man believed by the Mayas to be a living god, who also broke with the traditions set by many kings before him.
It seems that power was shared by Kaku Pakal and Inil Kopol, his half-brother, and probably different members of a family. This may have been a reaction to the experience of the collapse of dynastic kingship in the southern Maya lowlands. People didn't want to make the same mistake and put power on several individuals rather than one.
Like their ancestors for thousands of years before them, Kaku Pakal and his family drew their power from the stars. By day as by night, they studied the skies, closely following the movements of the moon and the sun. Determining their cycles was an attempt to interpret a divine message.
The movements of the stars is very regular, and so their worship of time is coming from this. They had a Venus calendar. It was a very complex elliptical orbit that was better than ours. And you have priests up there, making notes, seeing things for hundreds and hundreds of years. They're getting a real idea about these stars, which are also, deities. So you get to know more and more and more. Now, that's not science. This is prophecy. The movements of the stars will tell you a lot about the future.
The Mayas believed their priests read messages from the gods in the stars. To establish their power, the Chichén Itzá elite had a brilliant idea. They built a spectacular edifice dedicated to the heavenly vault, El Caracol, one of the first observatories ever built by mankind. Erected over a large platform, this 18-meter wide and 28-meter high tower overlooks the treetops. Inside are openings that look out in every direction.
These openings allowed them to observe the sunlight, the moonlight, and specific planetary constellations on the horizon at night, at sunset, and at dawn. For example, from this doorway, the sun traces a line between this opening and the opposing opening on the other side. That's how you know it's the winter solstice on December 21st.
Heavily damaged, only 3 of the original openings remain intact today. The first is aligned with the astronomical south. The second with the setting of the moon on March 21st. And the third faces the sunset on the autumn and spring equinoxes, as well as the northernmost position of the most sacred star in Mayan culture, Venus.
People have argued that the Maya had the original Star Wars because they used Venus in order to predict when to go to war and when not to. Venus was not the goddess of love, but a symbol of war. And so observation was more than just about the beauty of observing the sky. It was about controlling people, controlling politics, controlling the religious system, and so it's a powerful tool.
On either side of the tower, 2 trenches trace its curve. Between 2 to 8 meters deep, their purpose remains a mystery to archaeologists.
Recently, an engineer examining these decided that they were probably bases for moving screens. He argues that the Maya would have used gears and wheels in order to move these big wooden screens.
These two screens could have been activated when needed. Moving the screens would have allowed for a greater number of precise observations compared to using only the naked eye.
If that's the case, that would have provided another really powerful source of astronomical observatorially ability. Now again, that's speculative and is not being published or written up by archaeologists. However, those ditches or those areas do exist, and an explanation is needed.
With its one-of-a-kind Maya observatory and all its lavish monuments, Chichén Itzá quickly rose to power in less than a century. But there was one essential developmental component the city was missing: control of precious commercial routes. The masters thus launched an offensive in the north, near the port city of Islas Cerritos.
Chichén was investing not only here, but across a larger landscape in order to develop and control trade. It couldn't have done what it did without access to the coast.
I think they were eliminating competition. They would get control of all the trade routes. I mean, I think they were a predatory state. I mean, they would get booty and all of that. But if you look at what happened in the period, not very long period, afterwards, or maybe even during, they were extending a trade empire.
Their conquests allowed Chichén Itzá to control a territory of 100 kilometers and gave it direct access to the sea and a strategically valuable resource: salt.
A lot of Mesoamerica itself didn't have access to salt. And in fact, Islas Cerritos is very close, within a few miles of the beginning of some of the most important salt-producing areas in Yucatan. So I think it's pretty clear to me that Chichén was controlling the production and distribution of salt as well. So it was an important resource, I believe, for the Chichén state.
Chichén Itzá became the greatest economic power in the region. From Islas Cerritos, canoes loaded with precious merchandise could reach all of Mesoamerica.
It's a huge canoes, and it's very efficient. Why would you go so far? It's by water, but what really makes it efficient is you don't have to go through other kingdoms. We're gonna give you lots of trouble. You can swing out into the oceans.
And what Chichén did was, in order to acquire and move these luxury objects, Chichén established coastal ports from Belize to the Gulf of Mexico.
From the coast, Chichén Itzá's merchants went deep inland, all the way to the Mexican highlands. A journey that took them some 1,500 kilometers away to Tula, the powerful Toltec capital. The ensuing encounter was about to completely transform Chichén Itzá. By the end of the 9th century, Chichén Itzá's influence had grown so much that thousands of people migrated to the powerful city from all four corners of Mesoamerica.
It has opportunities, it's attractive to people, it's exciting, politically, ideologically, from a consumer perspective in terms of goods and services, the city security, this was the place to be. And I think that in-migration was part of the process of the growth of the city.
To welcome these new arrivals, Chichén Itzá needed to expand again. The old city began to put up scaffolding.
There's a time period where you start seeing the influx of international ideas. People start changing their houses. People start building additions to their buildings and reconfiguring things.
Above all, the city's center moved north, where vast swaths of forest were cleared to make place for new buildings.
When that happened, they didn't bring the stela. They brought to the new site center another way to depict or send a message about authorities.
There's a sort of a big change in the architecture, in the murals, in the religion, in that layout. And the question is, what caused that?
Previously built in traditional Maya style, the city began to radically change its appearance. In the new city center, one building came to symbolize this new trend: the Temple of the Warriors. This 150-meter-long complex is made up of several temples. Its vast underground chamber, supported by 200 columns, is unique in the Maya world. Crowning the top, two sculptures of the feathered serpent, a divinity that was previously unknown in Chichén Itzá, frame a series of columns and bas-relief warriors. Archaeologists have long been intrigued by these architectural choices.
The structure of the platform, the central stairway, the use of columns in front, this open space, the Venus figures, the feathered serpents, all of that is similar to what we see at Tula.
Tula's Pyramid B, in the former Toltec capital, inspired the design of Chichén Itzá's Temple of the Warriors. A side-by-side comparison of the blueprints of the two buildings reveals an almost identical structure. But what led to these changes? Why would the rising star of the Maya era adopt these previously foreign building codes?
For a long time, people have thought that Chichén Itzá was conquered by troops from Tula. I wouldn't say that it's not impossible, but whether this is evidence for a direct overtaking of Chichén Itzá, or whether there was more like a common style, is something which is still under heavy debate.
Whether a Toltec invasion took place or not, there's no doubt that the two cities are closely affiliated. Chichén Itzá adopted the codes of its distant Mexican cousin. A change in style that coincided with the death of Pakal and a comprehensive reorganization of power in the Maya city.
There's clearly a shift in the political organization. This divine king is no longer celebrated. What we see is the celebration of warriors. So it's probably a place where the social groups, the different warrior societies, came, interacted, carried out their official business, and it probably was exciting for young men to have an opportunity to publicly display their military prowess and abilities. So in some ways, I think this was a place where people could increase their social status by participation.
The Temple of the Warriors became the symbol of the new masters of Chichén Itzá. A powerful guild of soldiers that planned to impose their will upon the city and beyond. Once admired, Chichén Itzá was now feared.
Military power was so much more important at Chichén than the Maya centers and more organized. These temples are temples of warrior guilds, like unions. And so they would gather there, and obviously they would have a lot of power. And then what were all these Chichén people dressed up like warriors with warrior guilds? What were they doing? Playing chess? It's war.
What they were doing was, in essence, building a military order in order to carry out the socio-political agenda of the state. And part of that agenda was warring against local communities, terrorizing local communities, bringing in tribute from other towns and communities around, expanding the power.
The powerful Chichén Itzá army bended the neighboring cities to its will. Ekbalam and Uxmal were vanquished. The few survivors were bluntly herded to the city. Thrown into confinement cells, they waited to be sacrificed. Not far away was another prominently located and highly visible building, the Zompantli, which was adorned with thousands of carved skulls.
There are sticks going through the skulls so that they would have actually been, if you had seen them, they're depicting skulls one on top of the other. So this is actually a basal platform, or a platform that would have supported a large wooden rack. And the wooden rack would have been filled with human skulls.
The prisoners didn't have long to wait. One after another, they were offered to the gods. They were beheaded swiftly and without ceremony.
On these buildings, there are individuals that are walking with trophy heads. So you can see warriors actually holding the heads, probably the heads that would have been displayed on here. There are also depictions of eagles and jaguars holding human hearts, which suggests that part of the ritual involved with this would have entailed removing the heart from these victims. So this is a giant operation for human sacrifice. So whoever would have come here, both the citizens, visitors, whomever, would have been able to see here a visible image of the power of the state. Literally, you could stand here and count the number of human sacrifices. Probably in this case, there would have been hundreds, if not 1,000 or more skulls here.
A macabre spectacle meant to remind all of the fate that awaited Chichén Itzá's enemies, and which once again had Mexican origins.
They don't have Zompantlis everywhere. They're quite rare in the Maya lowlands. A Zompantli is a symbol of sophistication. It distinguishes Chichén from other Maya cities because Chichén represents the pinnacle of this kind of international culture, internationalization that's going on here.
But a reign of terror was not enough. In this cosmopolitan city, where cultures and languages mixed together, everyone has to be on board. To that end, what better than a new place of worship? Dominating the main square, a pyramid 30 meters high and 55 meters wide became the new religious center of Chichén Itzá. El Castillo, a building at the service of power.
You can imagine this is a theater. This pyramid doesn't sit like back somewhere hidden. Everyone always thinks of this stairway because when you would emerge from that building, you were looking out over this enormous plaza. 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 people waiting for you to go in and to come out. Imagine dressed up as an ancient Maya of Chichén, rising up those stairs on those days. The heavens, the universe is interacting with you and with this person. That's really powerful. That whoever was the person wielding that position of authority on the landscape would have been close to the gods, if not godlike themselves.
Here, thousands of faithful followers worship the new god of the city, Kukulkan, the feathered serpent. This being of Mexican origins was believed to be the messenger of the gods and the source of absolute power for he who knew how to listen. Of all Mesoamerican deities, Kukulkan is by far the most enigmatic. Some saw him as a supernatural being, while others believed he was a man of flesh and blood. Between myth and reality, the true nature of this serpent god seems to have been lost in the fog of history.
Did Kukulkan exist? I would say, yeah, it's a mixture of the human being and divinity. The key thing is here is where does the human being influence ends and where does divine figure appear?
One of the issues surrounding the relationship between Chichén and Tula was always this idea that the feathered serpent of the Toltecs was a living person who at some point left Tula and came south to Chichén and founded the city. Now, most of us don't believe that anymore.
Why Kukulkan becoming such an unimportant deal? That really does have something to do with the connection with Mexico. He's a big deal over there.
He may have been a deity which was regarded as a leader of the foreigners or somehow associated with the foreigners that came to Chichén Itzá.
By dedicating El Castillo to Kukulkan, Chichén Itzá's elite formed a powerful bond between the Mayas and the communities of central Mexico and ushered in an era of social peace. El Castillo thus became the most sacred place in the city, connected to the most sacred star, the sun.
This building didn't just sit on the landscape, it interacted with the landscape, particularly with the sun, for example. There are 91 stairs on each side. With the top, that's 365. So it's a space that is representing the year.
The solar cycle is at the heart of El Castillo's mechanics. On the spring and fall equinoxes, the sun casts a shadow on the rail of the temple staircase that reveals a serpent made of light. A magical spectacle that marks the start and the end of the rainy season.
During the course of the day, as the sun moves, the balustrade actually looks like a writhing serpent. And in the morning, it comes down from the heavens, and in the evening, it ascends back up into the heavens. So these balustrades are not simply architectural. Again, they're cosmological, right?
Measuring time is at the heart of Maya cosmology. And in Chichén Itzá, El Castillo is the key. In 1930, archaeologists made an incredible discovery. By digging this tunnel through the side of the temple, they discovered a second pyramid. This one 16 meters high and structurally identical to El Castillo. At its summit, in the belly of the Great Pyramid, was an exceptional temple, forbidden to the public.
We learned that its construction was tied to the way their calendar worked. Every 52 years, the Mayas added a layer to the structure. We're here in the second one, and it's very likely that beneath us lies the first construction level of the structure.
52 years, a length of time that's far from arbitrary. Because the Mayas actually used two calendars. The Hab, which is comprised of 365 days, symbolizing the solar cycle, and the Tzolk'in, a ritual calendar of 260 days divided into 13 months of 20 days each. 3 wheels of time that synchronize exactly every 52 years. By building their pyramids like Russian dolls, the Mayas prevented pillaging of the pyramid preceding El Castillo, a temple that hides one of the greatest treasures of Mesoamerica, the red jaguar throne.
The jaguar is the symbol of the underworld. The leader stood in this very spot to receive energies from above and below, from both the celestial world and the underworld. To the Mayas, this spot represents the most sacred place in all of Chichén Itzá, a place where only the leader of the city was allowed to enter.
The vertical axis of El Castillo is the imaginary axis that unites the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of darkness. It's a sacred place with a carefully chosen location. For El Castillo is located at the exact intersection of the four cenotes that surround the city. Sagrado in the north, Cholok in the south, Canjuyum in the east, and Holtun to the west. It's precisely here, beneath El Castillo, that archaeologists are on the brink of another incredible discovery. Using electrodes, they discovered a 20-meter high and 30-meter wide cavity, a mere 5 meters below the surface. El Castillo was seemingly built on top of an enormous cave.
Even though there's a gap, even though there is a void, the Maya knew that the karst, the soil, could be thicker in some areas. It might be the case here. I believe, my assumption is, there must be at the very least 5 meters of bedrock. If you think about it, most of these buildings are built over gaps, over caverns, and then they knew they could build this one here.
Only new excavations will determine whether there really is a fifth cenote here. A discovery that could provide precious new clues about the origins of the city.
If that is true, which I believe it is, it's going to be the foundational trait of all this city. They must have done everything from that cenote, and the offering, the elements, the archaeological elements there must contain valuable information to understand the city.
Obviously, if there's a cenote underneath the pyramid, that's super cool, because that means that this building is in fact sitting on the direct portal to the underworld. We haven't seen the cenote yet, and so the day that they show pictures of that cenote will be a worldwide event.
The military elite of Chichén Itzá had completed their power conquest. The city was in their hands, and the surrounding towns had been subjugated. But in order to keep the peace, a social outlet was needed. To that end, what better way than a ball game? The elites of Chichén Itzá thus had an enormous playing field built. 168 meters long and 70 meters wide, its rings hung some 9 meters off the ground. Spectator stands were built on both ends of the field. Along with a temple for the upper class, it was the biggest ball-playing field ever built in Mesoamerica.
The idea of building a ball court like this is saying we're the most powerful city-state in Yucatan, and there's no one who could compete with us on the playing field or building a playing field like this. This is an important political statement.
In this 2,000-year-old sport, two teams battle on the field to score points by sending the ball through the opposing team's ring without using their hands.
Sports are a way for society to interact with each other without going to war. They can compete on the playing field, and I think that they were doing that here. If we're standing here, let's say 900, 950 AD, what you would see here is not just this plain stone. All of this stone would be covered in stucco. It would be brightly painted, red, green, blue, yellow, so that it would have looked fantastic. And you would have probably had audience members sitting atop this area here, important personages at the ends of the ball court, feasting and calling out to the ball players. This would have been a massive celebration. For an event like this would be like the Super Bowl.
A game that players were hand-picked to play. But unlike American football, the game ended very differently. At the end of it, the losing players were sacrificed.
If we were in medieval Europe, like jousting matches, these were the elites that jousted. The masses might watch, but the people on the playing field were the upper class. So they're not just sacrificing a poor peasant, they're sacrificing a lord. I'm sure there were people who did not agree, but I think what was expected of you was to agree. It's an honor to be sacrificed, and in fact, it's essential for you to be sacrificed because the idea of rebirth and death, of fertility and growth, all of these things are connected to the sacrifice. So the ball court and the ball game are kind of like a machine designed to make the world go.
Although the city's inhabitants thoroughly enjoyed the show, the gods seemed indifferent to the bloodshed. Because beneath the city, the water reserves were dangerously dropping. After just 3 centuries of existence, the city began to run low on resources. The priests increased the number of ceremonies, invoking Tlaloc, the god of the rain, and made offerings in vain.
It looks like all this happened in a time of drought. There was problems up there. There was no rain. So one hypothesis is we are desperate for water.
And by the end of the 11th century, peasants could not harvest. So maybe peasants were able to survive, but they were unable to pay for the taxes. And the first ones affected by this were probably the elite.
Deprived of their subsidies, the city's elites are said to have simply disappeared. And along with them, the administration, the bureaucracy, and eventually the state. Yet not all archaeologists find this explanation to be convincing.
This was probably a difficult city to manage. There were lots of different people with lots of different values and norms here compared to a typical Maya center. Trying to keep them all engaged and connected to the system may have been one of the biggest challenges that they faced. One of the things you think about is, look at the Soviet Union. There was no war. I mean, there was no calamity. There's no aliens. There's no comets smashing. And it just fell apart. And so systems can fail without major kinds of events causing them.
Was Chichén Itzá the victim of a disastrous climate event? Or did it crumble beneath its own weight? No one knows. One thing is certain. The powerful Maya city has never ceased to fascinate anyone who's been lucky enough to admire its temples.
After Chichén Itzá collapsed and was abandoned by the majority of its population, it continued to serve as a place for pilgrimage. And it was never forgotten by the local population. When the Spaniards came in the 16th century, one of the first settlements was constructed over the ruins of Chichén Itzá.
And thus, the story of the last great Maya city comes to an end. An extraordinary city that marked the zenith of a 4,000-year-old civilization. One that continues to leave archaeologists wondering. Who knows what secrets the ancient Mayas buried in the city's depths? Who hasn't dreamed of these pre-Columbian temples? Of these faraway lands filled with legends? Who hasn't wanted to wander, guided by the sun, through the heart of Maya country? Tikal, Guatemala. This city, a genuine treasure of mankind for over 2,000 years, has been captivating visitors ever since it was rediscovered in the 19th century.
The way they build these huge, tall, incredible structures. Imagine these buildings more than 1,000 years and they're still there. That's impressive.
But it wasn't until very recently that experts made astounding discoveries thanks to state-of-the-art technology. An aerial laser system is undertaking a scan of the jungle, revealing that Tikal was once a sprawling sovereign city comparable to ancient Rome.
It's the size of what is now Guatemala City. And Guatemala City can hold at least between 3 to 4 million of people.
At 70 meters high, Temple 4, the second highest pyramid ever built after Giza, hosted gory sacrifices. At its base, a hidden tunnel unveils the secrets behind the extraordinary ingenuity of the Maya civilization.
You can make jokes to the Egyptian archaeologists when you see them about their sad little pyramids.
A gigantic citadel buried some 10 kilometers from the city's center. Fratricidal wars, a voracious appetite for sacrifices, architectural genius, and a mastery of science and astronomy. All part of the Odyssey of Tikal, the most bewitching Maya city and of its builders, from its expansion to its mysterious disappearance. (750 AD). In the heart of the deepest jungle of the Petén region in northern Guatemala rose the city-state of Tikal, the largest Maya city ever built at the time. A sprawling city with multiple areas. 2 huge pyramids overlook the center, among which that of the jaguar priest, the ultimate symbol of power. On this 12,000 square meter plaza, the royal palace towered over the entire valley. Across from it, one of the greatest necropolis in the Maya world was home to the king's tombs. Further west was Temple 4. Standing at 70 meters, it was the highest temple ever built in Mesoamerica. Moreover, an ingenious hydraulic system carried water across the entire city. All of this brilliance was at the service of the most powerful Maya kings, considered gods among men. This is where they flaunted their power in front of hundreds of thousands of people during massive ceremonies.
It would have been an amazing spectacle and a great source of power. I mean, they had wars and so on, but if you're a ruler of one of their vassal states that's, 100, 150 kilometers away, you would come to this and you would have the honor of being a participant. The theater is the thing. It is not reinforcing power. It is a great part of the power itself.
The kings exerted their power over a plethora of Maya cities that were under their rule. And yet, in just a few decades, the mighty Tikal would mysteriously sink into oblivion. Swallowed by the tropical forest, it would take over 1,000 years until the first Western expeditions of the 19th century rediscovered its splendors. But the majestic city didn't immediately give up all of its mysteries. Some of its secrets are about to be unraveled thanks to a revolutionary tool: LiDAR. It's a surveying method consisting of a super powerful laser aboard a plane that can see through the tree canopy and reveal the slightest fluctuations in the terrain.
Now LiDAR is our X-rays. We can see the landscape. We can see every single modification the Mayas did. Not just only the major architecture features. We also can see areas where they were farming. They were almost invisible for us.
Over 2,000 square kilometers of forest have been scanned, allowing the discovery of 60,000 previously unseen human structures. LiDAR has far exceeded the expectations of the archaeologists. It reveals the city had a completely different size, one much greater than all previous projections.
We used to have 16 square kilometers. Now we have 75 square kilometers. And with the peri-urban area, it's around 527 square kilometers. It's the size of what is now Guatemala City. And Guatemala City can host at least between 3 to 4 million of people.
This discovery gives rise to several new questions. How could a city 38 times bigger than ancient Rome be built in such an environment? And above all, how did it all start? Around 800 BC, a first community made its way to this steep location overrun with vegetation. Yet it was there, in the middle of the jungle, that these nomads chose to settle down.
Where do they come from? That's a puzzle. All the Maya territory was in movement all the time.
It's like a soda water in a cup. You start to see a lot of bubbles. And that's where thing is happening here in the lowlands. You start to have a lot of communities that were moving around this landscape, hunting and start to farm.
These first inhabitants were soon joined by others that swelled the ranks. What was a simple community turned into a village. Tikal was born.
You're not supposed to have civilization in tropical forest. It's very, very wet. The soils are very thin in some places because everything's tied up in the canopy. There are a few navigable rivers, and they're on the edge because the water goes through the limestone down there.
In this green desert where water immediately infiltrates the ground, the survival of the young city seemed uncertain. The Maya people of Tikal were, however, about to make a rare and previous discovery that would forever change their destiny.
There were springs. And you know, the water from springs is virginal water. It's pristine water. It's really very like sacred or magical. Imagine having a spring. Water is coming from the earth. That will give you an extra significance to the landscape.
A blessed land on which the inhabitants of Tikal would erect a first temple. The Lost World Pyramid. Located in the southeast of the current city, this pyramid was rebuilt on several occasions.
When they build the first structures, they want to build another larger. What they do, they cover this one and they start to make another one on the top. It's like you're looking at an onion when you cut it and you see different layers. The earliest layer will be here in the bottom. And that's where they found over here in 1980s. Then it's one of the oldest structure in Tikal.
This 30-meter pyramid actually conceals 5 other older ones. The first was built in 600 BC. It was only 3 meters high and 24 meters wide. Despite its modest size, it became the nerve center of the Tikal community. From the top, priests used to observe a spectacle orchestrated by the gods themselves. The heavenly vault and its myriad of stars.
You have priests up there, making notes, seeing things for hundreds and hundreds of years. They're getting a real idea about these stars. The movements of the stars will tell you a lot about the future. They also tell you when maybe you need to do some rituals or sacrifice.
Being able to predict the future was the key to the immense power reserved to the local elite. A power for which they acquired knowledge about the cycles of Venus, the moon, and the sun. In Tikal, the king star would even condition the construction of the city center.
These buildings are the ones that make the solar observatory. And depends how the sun moves in the sky. And we'll start over here and we'll continue moving, and that's how they can mark. That's where you need the 3 buildings, and the sun will rise behind them.
Sitting on top of the Lost World Pyramid, the priests observed the motion of the sun. In October, it indicated the beginning of the dry season. In April, the start of the rainy season. That's how the perfect orientation of the temples symbolized the winter and summer solstices. The Maya used this system to figure out when to sow and when to harvest. Of all ancient civilizations, they would become the best astronomers.
It wasn't astronomy, this was astrology. They weren't trying to refine science or something. And there really is this, it's not just Mesoamerica, all around the world, Stonehenge or whatever it is, this is something that people record. But the Maya got such a good control of it. That's one of the reasons they worship time. It was so regular and impressive.
In the 1st centuries AD, Tikal was one of the most flourishing cities in all the Maya lowlands. But its fate was about to be shaken up by an unprecedented event. Fourth century AD. Central Mexico. Teotihuacan. The largest Mesoamerican city ever built. It was the capital of a mysterious civilization looking to stretch its empire and take possession of the riches of faraway Maya territory.
Tikal was a city that was highly cultivated. It was a very sophisticated city, and Tikal remained as a leading power in the Maya lowlands and was very attractive for Teotihuacanos.
January 378. Men traveled across the arid lands of Mexico towards the Petén. They were Teotihuacano soldiers equipped with the best weapons of the time. The event is narrated on a headstone in Tikal.
The text on Stela 31 tells us that in 378, at the same day when the foreigners arrived, the king of Tikal died. This is clearly not a peaceful arrival of just a few merchants. We are talking about soldiers here. And they established a new dynasty.
Teotihuacan seemed to have subjugated Tikal. But not everyone agrees.
I tend to think that it may be a bit exaggerated. I mean, You know, it's not like now. It's like Napoleon said, armies, you know, travel on their stomach. There's a lot of people who come along to help, support. You better show me, you know, commoners, pottery, the people that came with them. And we don't have anything like that yet.
While no archaeological evidence confirms the invasion of Tikal by Teotihuacan, other elements have shown that the two cities maintained commercial ties well before 378. Then what role did the Teotihuacanos play in the Maya city? Thanks to LiDAR, and for the first time ever in Tikal, archaeologists are about to unravel its mystery.
LiDAR is showing that before they thought there was a natural hill, now you can see it's very similar to La Ciudadela of Teotihuacan. And that's where we think that maybe it was a Teotihuacan barrio.
Some 1,500 kilometers away, the citadel is one of the three major temples in Teotihuacan. It's a gigantic structure comprising a surrounding wall, a vast courtyard, and a temple. Its shape is strangely similar to the image detected by LiDAR. A few hundred meters from the center of Tikal, in the midst of the tropical forest, initial excavations seem to confirm the archaeologists' hunch.
This is the eastern structure facing west, and this is the area that we think is very similar to Teotihuacan. So we want to prove these people, they have the knowledge of Teotihuacan, they know the culture, they know how to build these structures, they know the meaning of that kind of architecture. And that's what we are trying to prove with this excavation.
Pending the results of these excavations, other elements prove the influence of the remote central Mexican capital. Near the Lost World Pyramid is a temple that has Teotihuacan written all over it.
This is how we call it in Mesoamerican architecture, talud tablero. It's a type of architecture that is very common in Mesoamerica. Then you're going to have a talud, there is this wall over here, and a tablero that you can see it here in the top. Now we only can see the stones, but before, like 1,000 years ago, these structures were painted and covered with a plaster. Most of the buildings here were painted in red. And sometimes the tableros were used also to depict some type of art.
Already widespread in Teotihuacan, the talud tablero technique became highly popular in Tikal.
The people from the ancient Mayas, they knew about the symbolism of this type of architecture. And the elites from here tried to emulate those type of architecture. There was a fashion, but also was make the tight connections between them and the elites of Teotihuacan.
Now an ally of the most powerful city in all of Mesoamerica, Tikal became the nerve center of Petén and extended its influence all the way to Copan. But the domination was short-lived. In fact, 2 centuries later, when the Teotihuacano Empire collapsed, a weakened Tikal was conquered by a rival city, Calakmul, located about 150 kilometers to the north and led by the Khan dynasty. Destitute of its prestige, would Tikal ever rise from the ashes? August 6, 695. The faithful soldiers of Jasa Chan Kawil, new king of Tikal, savored their revenge. After 130 years of submission to Calakmul, they had just won a decisive battle. Humiliated, the survivors in the rival army could only await their sacrificial demise. To mark his victory, Jasa Chan Kawil ordered the construction of 2 gigantic temples.
They defeated the great enemy, giant, powerful hegemony of Calakmul. And he wanted to make a statement. We're back. And so these temples are very different. They do not have temples inside of them. They were not built. Most of the temples are like Russian dolls. They were built all at once, all of them, which is amazing.
The Temple of the Mask would comprise 4 massive pedestals and stand 42 meters high. Across from it, the Temple of the Jaguar Priest embodied Jasa Chan Kawil's absolute power. It would reach 47 meters in height, becoming one of the symbols of the city.
When you see this architecture and some of the other things the Maya did, you know, they say it must have been space people, the way they carved jade, it must be aliens or something. But they had all these clever techniques.
One of the techniques in which the people of Tikal became true experts was the art of leveling. Before building a pyramid, the Maya would level the ground and cover it with a thick platform.
One of the things that people don't realize about Tikal is that the massive amount of labor that goes into platforms. This whole area looks nice and flat. It's an enormous platform. But what is really impressive is that the whole area of the site is a series of platforms.
For the main plaza, the Maya built no fewer than 12,000 square meters of platform. It took about 16 square kilometers of it to level the center of the city. These platforms and pyramids, however, required astronomical quantities of material. They also represented a considerable technical challenge for a people that didn't master metalwork. Luckily, the subsoils of Tikal were packed with an easily accessible and endless resource: limestone.
The Maya exploited the limestone in different ways, not only for construction material, but also for tools. The core of the limestone, it's very hard. So they created axes, they created hammers, they created spears.
They used these tools to extract the millions of tons of stone needed for their colossal construction sites.
So they design the trace of the stone that they want to cut, but also they burn the limestone in order to create plaster to cover all the walls. That is showing us the knowledge and sophistication that the Maya achieved by controlling and using this material.
The Maya had to carry the carved stone on their backs, as they didn't have beasts of burden. Yet it took them less than 2 decades to complete what would become the new city center. An enormous endeavor carried out by thousands of workers.
This is something you do for the Holy Lord. And it wasn't because they were forced to do it. They had captives, but they didn't have a lot of slaves. I don't think anybody was coerced. We find that hard to believe, but again, they were devoutly religious.
Atop this new pyramid, and away from prying eyes, Jasa Chan Kawil was about to perform a sacred ritual. A self-sacrifice during which he pierced his own penis. The ensuing blood was thought to have prodigious virtues.
Blood is the absolutely central element to all their thinking. That blood is what connects him to the ancestors and also the deities. And then he'll see the vision serpent or have some other hallucinations. That's what connects him to the future.
As he predicted the future to his people, Jasa Chan Kawil became more than a prophet. He was the earthly envoy of the gods, the key to holding infinite power.
This was the big, highest ritual of the Maya. This is when they would have thousands of people, tens of thousands of people coming in from everywhere. And then the king would come out, and this is what's really amazing, especially here with these steep temples.
The Temple of the Jaguar Priest was conceived following a very specific design. Each of the 9 terraces represented one of the 9 levels of the underworld, the kingdom of the dead. At the center of the pyramid was the axis mundi, the imaginary thread connecting the underworld, the human world, and the world of the gods.
In Maya hieroglyphic writing, the word for temple is width, which is the same word as mountain. And many temples therefore embody ritual places or places where the creation had taken place. And kings could reenact events of the mythological past on these temples.
But in the meantime, it was south of the main plaza that Jasa Chan Kawil would reign over the world of the living, in a palace overlooking the entire valley. A series of constructions accommodated the court, the clergy, the city planners, and a cohort of servants. Between 200 and 300 people lived around this inner courtyard, all in the service of the king.
In that central room is a throne where the king would sit and the visiting people would come, sometimes nobles with a petition, sometimes another visiting ruler. And this was a private area for elites. Festivals in here where the nobles and rulers would, they would often be, there'd be hallucinogenic enemas on one side, and the king is dancing, you know, and there's others dancing with a snake, and some of the nobles are looking up into the air, and there's floating porcupines wearing beads and an enema pouch over in the side. They were obviously taking hallucinogens.
Initially 3 stories high and 215 meters long, the palace was a maze of long and narrow rooms.
The rooms tend to be narrow because they did not have the true arch. They had the corbelled vault, they call it, which the stones, it's like a child with blocks building. There's a stone, and then another one closer, another one closer, another one closer, and a capstone. So it's unstable, there's a tendency to collapse.
That's because the Maya didn't know about the keystone. Well known in the Western world, that technique allows to transfer the weight of an arch to the retaining walls. But since the Maya used corbel arches, nothing allowed the forces to be distributed.
This sort of long, narrow, high style that was really a result of, technology, they embraced it. And so they built their temples that way, with the roof cones and so on. Because there would be wooden things to sit on with beautiful pillows and curtains, and it would have been a beautiful little room.
The year was now 734 AD. It saw the death of Jasa Chan Kawil after a reign of 5 decades that left a profound imprint on the city. His body was buried 6 meters under the pyramid of the jaguar priest.
And it's a massive burial. It's a huge burial chamber, one of the largest burial chambers we know from the Maya lowlands. And after the burial chamber, the temple, Temple 1, the temple of the Great Jaguar, was constructed over it.
Jasa Chan Kawil thus joined the pantheon of the kings of Tikal. Before that, about 20 of his predecessors had been buried just a few feet away in the North Acropolis. During a lavish ceremony, the deceased was groomed for his final journey. Luxurious offerings demonstrated his rank.
They buried their dead under the floors. You wanted to be near your ancestors. And if someone was important, they might turn that eventually into a shrine, and it would become bigger. And here, especially in Tikal, one structure would then grow into a temple. This is one of the great unique things of Tikal, that you have one place where they are all buried. It's a cemetery of kings.
About 100 temples were built on top of one another over the course of centuries. Some of them covered monumental sculptures of Shak, the rain deity. Tikal reasserted itself as the staple city of the Petén. Its future king would have to defend that status, which aroused the envy of the neighboring cities. On December 8, 734, the son of the late king acceded to the throne. His name? Yikin Chan Kawil.
Yikin Chan Kawil must have been a great war leader. He had ambitions to enlarge the territory that was controlled by Tikal, and he directed his military attacks against former vassals of the Khan dynasty. So what he did is he completed the work which was begun by his father.
Yikin Chan Kawil sent his soldiers to wipe out the last resisting bastions of Khan faithful. He thus consolidated the borders of this empire. But flooring his enemies wasn't enough.
It's just like Renaissance Italy in that the battling was not just war. It was who has the best rituals. Look at the temples. You know, who has the artists? Exactly like the Renaissance.
To reinforce his power, Yikin Chan Kawil embarked on the construction of a temple more ambitious still than his fathers before him. Temple 4. Now covered in jungle green, it peaks at 70 meters. It is the highest temple ever built in Mesoamerica.
The inclination is really, really steep. And the amazing thing is these steps, they go down like 200 meters. And the king would genitally bloodlet. Imagine if you had just lost liters of blood, and then you would process with 200 pounds of equipment down these stairs in a dignified way. And they had to train the princes probably from the time they were 5 or 6 in doing this. And I know of no case that is recorded anywhere of a king falling, because you're dead if you fall. So I mean, it's just, that is also impressive. I wouldn't want to be a Maya king, by the way.
Temple 4 featured a dizzying slope of 82 degrees. How did the Maya design this pyramid that remains intact some 1,300 years later? In order to understand, archaeologists dug up a tunnel to the heart of the pyramid. Much to their surprise, they discovered another structure inside.
We are right now in front of those walls. We were thinking that that was an earlier version of the temple. But once we saw all the way on both sides and in different sides of the structure, we come to the conclusion, talking with the masons, this was not an earlier version, but a construction beams.
Some 250 cells, each 4 meters in length and 1.6 meters in height, were appended to one another all the way to the top, like a giant beehive. This structure supported 119 cubic meters of backfill and prevented the pyramid from collapsing under its own weight.
Architects, Tikal are recognized to have been one of the best in the Maya area.
They knew they had to do something. I mean, they were afraid it would fall down. I think, don't you think that it's possible that, just like in Egypt, there are somewhere around here earlier experiments that failed, and that's how they learned to do this? Because, you know, in Egypt, the collapsed pyramid at Medum and the bent pyramid, you know, this is steeper, and it didn't collapse. So you can, like, make jokes to the Egyptian archaeologists when you see them about their sad little pyramids.
Yeah, you know? This is a lot of stable, right?
Yeah.
And it is still in here.
In order to support the colossal weight of the pyramid, the Maya had to stabilize the ground. To that end, they built a platform 5 meters in thickness and with a surface area of 15,000 square meters. A layer of stucco completed the construction.
We are standing right on a floor that is about 10 centimeters thick. Can you imagine the amount of wood burned, that amount of limestone in order to just get this floor done? That was a huge effort. And this platform is on top of the bedrock, so it couldn't be more solid.
It would take the Maya workers less than 10 years to build Temple 4. An absolute feat.
That's very fast, you know, because the Egyptian pyramids, they would sometimes build it just when the next pharaoh was born. They would start building it. It took so long.
Yeah, it's incredible how the ruler was concentrated with such an amount of people and resources, and how sure he was that he was going to make it. I mean, once you began, that is not something, oh, okay, I'm going to leave it just like that in the middle, or a third, or 1/3, or 2/3. Once you are on the enterprise, you need to finish it, and he made it.
The construction of Temple 4 marked the apex of the city. Based on the latest estimates, its population then reached 60,000 people. This required enormous water and food resources.
If you really want to have these huge cities, you have to make sure that there's water available for everybody. And you don't have to walk 5 kilometers to bring a jar of water.
It was obvious that the city couldn't solely rely on its single source of water. The Maya, hence, had a brilliant idea. Using the inclination of the squares to collect precious rainwater.
This park was open to the public. They hired an Italian company whose specialty was hydraulic systems, because they wanted to make sure that when it rains, water won't interfere with the visit. And we were impressed to see that the set of canals these Italians put in the park are exactly on top of the hydraulic system that the Maya chose more than 1,500 years before.
The water collected was transferred to a reservoir, Crates filled with sand were used to filter the water and make it drinkable.
When we find out, we were very excited because we have no other reference like that. We have no other mention of any other reservoir that has this upper tank filled in with another sediment different from the local material, that it's very, very, very likely it was used as filter.
The water was then transferred further down in gigantic terrace tanks with a capacity totaling 900,000 cubic meters. To control the flow, 2 huge dams were built. 80 meters wide and 10 meters high, they were carved out of the rock and ended with a wall. Blocked with wood or stone panels, the pipes, 30 centimeters in diameter, allowed to check water quality in each basin. This complex system required a significant workforce.
State will be in charge to keep them working, to keep them clean. Therefore, if they do that, they will have the control to tell who can go to these reservoirs, how much water can you take, and all that. And they will make sure that water flows through in the canals. So, but that's an assumption. We think that's the way it works.
The Maya were able to take advantage of a hostile forest and steep terrain.
Pre-Columbian cultures, they were the first landscapers. And if you look at all the maps of the Maya cities, they have like a very good order in organization and in the settlement pattern space they're using.
It was this ability to adapt that allowed the Maya to farm enough to feed the tens of thousands of locals. Corn, beans, and wheat highlighted the richness of the city, which continued to attract new migrants daily. With 80 to 120 inhabitants per square kilometer, equal to the current population density in a country like France, it was one of the densest cities in the world at the time. How long would Tikal sustain its exponential growth? By the middle of the 8th century, the city had vanquished all of its enemies. It dominated an enormous territory, stretching from Calakmul to Naranjo. Yet it struggled to manage such an imposing area.
There was a vacuum of power, and many local lords and local dynasties started to proclaim themselves as independent kings. They say, I am the divine lord of Tikal. And all of a sudden we have 5 or 10 divine lords of Tikal. For me, this is the beginning of the end.
Politically weakened, Tikal would have to deal with a new challenge: an unprecedented drought. Over the next century, precipitations decreased by about 50%.
You know, they build these great reservoirs, they build these great roads. Then you have a period of drought or decline or something, and you're dependent on them now, and you can't maintain them. And so it actually makes it worse because now you have this wonderful system and you can't maintain it and so then it spirals faster down.
Faced with this climate issue, the elite chose to build even more so as to appease the anger of the gods and encourage rain to return. This reproachable behavior came with a heavy price on the environment.
Cities grew very big. They were really abusing the landscape, like cutting too many trees. If you see, for example, the post holes of the pre-classic, there are these big trees. And then in the classic, they were a little bit narrower and narrower because they didn't let them grow as big as before.
But again, this was really like Versailles. It was incredibly impressive, huge expenditure of energy and setting the stage, you know, for the revolution. In this case, there is malnutrition, there are growing ecological problems, and they're sort of just intensifying what they did before. So, you know, again, it's a beautiful disaster going on. I mean, the temples are impressive, and this sculpture and that sculpture, but that really doesn't help the economic system.
The city became an ogre that consumed everything in its path. Little by little, the people of Tikal lost faith in their leaders, who multiplied the ceremonies hoping to stay in power.
There's a big increment in massive sacrifices, in more quantities than before, so that can allow us to make an interpretation that there's a time of crisis. The role of the elites is to keep the status quo. And then the elites are not able to hold the status quo. They're going to say, this doesn't work, and I'm not going to pay tribute, because first I'm going to feed my family, and if the pyramid collapses, whatever.
Faced with a shortage of water and the helplessness of the elite, the inhabitants started to leave the city. Cornered from all angles, Tikal withdrew into itself. Thanks to their use of LiDAR in the jungle, archaeologists have discovered the traces of the city in dire straits.
This is the area where we found the new parts of this defensive wall of Tikal. That's where we're gonna be interested to go and check. And you see here, the LiDAR stopped right here. And what is happening over here? That's what we're gonna see when we extend our LiDAR map, to try to understand if it surrounded the entire area or not. But that we're gonna do it with the new LiDAR map.
A 6-meter-tall outer wall seemed to have surrounded the city. But for what purpose? What were the elite of Tikal fearing?
It's not just for protecting during a war. Also, it's trying to make people to don't move. Like also, you can stop some type of migration. We know the Mayas migrate a lot. When a city collapses or something, people will moving. And I think also it's controlling people. And we still don't know who was able to go and cross and get to another city. Everybody could do it, or everybody can go and farm in different cities. We don't know that yet.
The elite seemingly tried to contain the bleeding, but in vain. The gods remained deaf to their appeals. Rain didn't come. In less than a century, Tikal became a ghost town. Throughout the Peten, the cities fell one after the other.
It's the network. A civilization is a network of all these, and it had collapsed. And so the fact that this site or that site stumbled on, Tikal continued for a while in a pathetic way, but many of the places, many sites, it was boom. It was pretty fast. However, it's a thermostat. You know, the heat builds up, builds up, builds up, and then boom, the air conditioning goes on. And it's sudden, but these things, throughout the late Classic, they were building.
And that's how Tikal collapsed, after being one of the greatest and most glorious Maya cities of all time. A gigantic city with vast unexplored sections that LiDAR is finally revealing. Under the thick jungle, the city-state isn't done revealing its secrets. Who knows what revelations Tikal still holds about this astounding civilization of builders. Some 45 kilometers from Mexico lies the birthplace of the gods, Teotihuacan. Erected in the 1st century AD, it was as heavily populated as Athens. Its 65-meter Pyramid of the Sun is the 2nd largest in the world after the Great Pyramid of Giza, built using only man's muscle power.
All of Teotihuacan was created without any metal, which is amazing because that includes everything from the construction equipment. So it wasn't the technology, it was the people that created Teotihuacan.
Of all Mesoamerican cities, Teotihuacan is the most mysterious. It was the stage of thousands of human sacrifices. Its unique construction is the work of builders whose identity remains unknown.
They were like Martians. I mean, they pulled in people into this highly organized city on a grid system. This was like nothing before.
An enigma, the key of which may lie deeply buried in a 102-meter-long tunnel beneath the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent.
My theory is that for a period of time, the end of the tunnel was used to store the remains of someone specific, someone with a lot of power, most likely a first-era leader of Teotihuacan.
Archaeologists have recently made local discoveries that reveal the secrets behind the construction of history's very first pre-Columbian megalopolis. Teotihuacan, a city born out of an incredibly crazy idea. To build the city as a giant cosmogram, a perfect replica of the universe, as a way to reach the level of the gods. Following a perfectly orthogonal layout, the city is divided into 4 quadrants, separated by 2 avenues, oriented by the 4 cardinal points. At their intersection, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, dedicated to the snake god, Quetzalcoatl, symbolizes the center of the universe. At the north end of the 2-kilometer-long Avenue of the Dead is the Pyramid of the Moon, standing 42 meters high and perfectly aligned with Cerro Gordo Peak. Facing west, the 215-meter-wide Pyramid of the Sun is only rivaled by the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt. The surrounding lands feature 2,200 dwellings spreading over 23 square kilometers. A gigantic city that reached 200,000 inhabitants in its heyday and which took 5 centuries to complete.
Teotihuacan was an impressive city, one of the 5 largest cities in the whole world back then.
It's really not just the city, it's a landscape. It's so massive that the imprint of the ancient city still is making thousands and millions of people from all over the world come to visit it. That's how successful they were as far as creating a convincing template that attracted that number of people.
The city became a hotspot for worshippers, thanks to its many lavish ceremonies, much like on this night in 350 AD. From the Avenue of the Dead, tens of thousands of pilgrims marched toward the Pyramid of the Moon. At its peak, and with their hands tied, men awaited in fear. Coming from all 4 corners of Central America, they were diplomats, warriors, or merchants. all well-born individuals whose sacrifice was expected to please the gods and consecrate the imposing monument. With a swoop of the razor-sharp obsidian axe, the men were beheaded. They all suffered the same fate, and their corpses were placed in the heart of the Great Pyramid.
Every culture in the world practiced sacrifices, even the Romans and the Greeks. They all practiced human sacrifice, but it was something very special here. It was deeply rooted in daily life, whether as self-sacrifice, collective or familial sacrifice, or even entire neighborhoods.
You don't select just anyone for sacrifice. They have to be specific individuals selected for becoming the ultimate sacrificial victims, representing the state that are able to fulfill the function of a successful ritual dedication.
For what reason? Well, it was a way to guarantee the durability of their landmarks. And when they wanted to build a new monument, they had to carry out a new sacrifice. The more they gave, the more they expected to receive.
While it is the most impressive, Teotihuacan is also the most mysterious city of Mesoamerica. Its civilization left no trace behind, and its true name fell into complete oblivion. It was only centuries after its fall that the Aztecs, standing before such perfection, gave the city the name of Teotihuacan, meaning birthplace of the gods. One question has continued to plague archaeologists ever since. Who built this most incredible pre-Columbian city? In the 1st century BC, at an altitude of 2,275 meters, men and women from northern Mexico crossed the semi-arid highlands in search of a place to settle. A journey that would lead them all the way to the Valley of Mexico.
I believe that there were people back then who were geomancers. Geomancy is a little-known gift. Those who have it are able to determine where a city should be founded.
And they moved into the Valley of Mexico, which is a rich, rich valley. And because of the richness of the soils and so on, they were able to pull people together physically and still support them.
An abundance that would draw an ever-increasing number of migrants to Teotihuacan in just a few decades.
There were between 15 and 20,000 inhabitants, which was already a large colony for that time. And those men and women needed to be fed. So they obviously had to figure out a way to increase the yield of their crops.
A soaring population that pushed city leaders to rethink traditional agricultural practices. A food shortage would have clearly been fatal to the young city. To increase food production, they came up with an ingenious system of irrigation. Fed by rainwater, 2 reservoirs, each 500 meters long, 5.5 meters wide, and 1.4 meters deep, irrigated large expanses of agricultural land. The water was pulled by gravity into grooves carved into the bedrock, which maintained constant humidity in the thin layer of arable soil. A complex system that allowed for multiple harvests annually, much to the prestige of the city's elite.
It's highly likely that the group that oversaw the planning and construction of the system started to gain more and more power.
The political authority of Teotihuacan is very well contested, right? Some people say that it was a type of collaborative rulership, and some say no, it was a very traditional autocratic rulership, which one ruler that resided over the city itself. The reason we're contesting it so much is because, one, we don't have a writing system, so we don't have a history of, the Maya area. They have lavishly engraved epigraphic records of every ruler, every affair he had. We don't have that at Teotihuacan. The second thing is that we don't actually have a burial of a king. So a centralized authority, it doesn't have to be one person, but it's much easier if it is. So until I see evidence for the contrary, I think it's really important to keep that in mind.
Whether or not they shared their power, the city's elites definitely had some serious competition in the region. The south was home to the Zapotec Empire and the impressive city of Monte Alban. To the east was the powerful Maya civilization and its monumental cities of Nakbe and Calakmul. And just a day away on foot to the southwest was Cuicuilco, the largest urban center in the Valley of Mexico at the time. And all of these cities were home to monumental pyramids.
Religion played a fundamental role in the creation of the world for the ancient people of Mesoamerica. There's not a single city that wasn't built around a temple. It was a central, cohesive element.
Pyramids are really artificial mountains. They are able to bring to life, it's not just a mountain, but it's the mountain where the ancestor spirits are living. That's how you communicate with your ancestors. It's about being able to connect with the community and the gods and the whole ecological order by building these mountains.
Teotihuacan didn't simply want to rival its powerful neighbors. It wanted to dominate them. To that end, builders needed to devise a city unlike any other and make Teotihuacan the beacon of a new era. The year was 50 AD. The future city began to take shape around an immense road that was 2 kilometers long and 70 meters wide, the Avenue of the Dead. This central axis then branched into a network of perfectly perpendicular streets and alleyways. A city grid that foreshadowed large modern metropolises like New York City or Beijing.
It was urban planning on an unprecedented level, anywhere in the world. That's why we consider Teotihuacan to be the most perfect example of urban planning.
They were like Martians. They pulled in people into this highly organized city on a grid system. This was like nothing before. That would have required something like that to be impressive, to make a statement of power.
A statement of power illustrated by 3 sanctuaries. The first, at a colossal 65 meters high and 215 meters wide, was the Pyramid of the Sun. With a volume of over 1 million cubic meters, it's the biggest pyramid ever built in Mesoamerica.
This pyramid was the megaphone of Teotihuacan. This is what everybody looked towards. No matter if you're a farmer in the hinterlands of Teotihuacan, you saw the pyramid, you saw what was going on, you saw the smoke signal. It doesn't matter where you live. You will identify with the Sun Pyramid. You will be proud to be part of this city so magnificent that it radiates its presence throughout the whole valley.
A pyramid dedicated to the most sacred star of Mesoamerica, the sun. The structure was precisely oriented 15.5 degrees east of astronomical north. The western wall is perfectly aligned with the setting sun on August 12th, which marks the beginning of the dry season, and on April 29th, which marks the beginning of the rainy season.
They were sky watchers. They were scientists and astrologers that interpreted the sun, predicted eclipses, understood the Venus cycle. And so it's really incredible to understand how meaningful this place was.
The exact, movement of the stars and making their time system and so on was astrology. And, in some of these, people say, well, they could predict the seasons and when to plant. That's quite ridiculous. The farmers knew about this a lot better than the kings. And so these things had a religious meaning.
A pyramid connected to the stars, but also used to keep time. That's because the Teotihuacanos designed the building according to ancient Mesoamerican calendars. The Hab, comprised of 365 days symbolizing the solar cycle, and the Solkin, a ritual calendar of 260 days divided into 13 months of 20 days each. A complex calendar system, which thanks to a recent discovery has also been tied to the unit of measurement used by Teotihuacano architects, the TMU. A standard length of 83 centimeters corresponding roughly to the distance between a human's fingertips and their heart.
What's fascinating about this measurement unit is that they actually tell us a little bit about how they were able to materialize what they saw into the sky and how they interpret that physically into the walls, the rooms.
Therefore, the 215-meter width of the Pyramid of the Sun corresponds to 260 TMUs, the exact number of days on the ritual calendar. The pyramid was surrounded by a 34-meter-wide platform, bringing its depth to 431 meters, or 520 Teotihuacan measurement units, twice the symbolic number of 260.
When I say the Teotihuacanos were ingenious engineers, I'm not kidding. They really were able to not only kind of make it look nice, it actually really made you embody the cosmos by just walking through the city itself. What a better way to experience Teotihuacan than embodying their understanding of the whole world works through experience.
But beyond symbolism, the architects needed to figure out how to erect such a massive monument. To do so, they relied on an unexpected ally. Popocatépetl, a volcano located 100 kilometers to the south of Teotihuacan, which had been forming the foundation of the Valley of Mexico for thousands of years. An almost inexhaustible supply of volcanic rock was extracted by workers from dozens of underground quarries all around the city.
They call it specifically this type of basalt, which is locally called tessontle. And this tessontle has a lot of pores, so it's very lightweight and you can shape it very easily. So it's easier to carry to you want to build buildings. That's why they preferred this type of rocks. But they were not available on the surface. They had to dig below the tepetate layer. This is volcanic tuff, and this is very soft. As you see here, you can destroy it very easily. And they crushed tepetate to make a base of the floor.
In total, some 715,000 cubic meters of this rock was extracted from the earth to build the entire city of Teotihuacan. The material was then carried by men on their backs for hundreds of meters. That's because pre-Columbian civilizations never domesticated animals to help them carry heavy loads.
They compensated for the lack of pack animals with an efficient use of manpower. The people were the labor force, and they were very effectively put to work in a well-organized way in order to be productive. That's one of the characteristics of Mesoamerican societies.
The rulers of the city knew they had an abundant supply of workers. The population of Teotihuacan and its surroundings was already at 80,000 inhabitants. Men from each family were selected to be part of the workforce.
Religion played a very important role in controlling the people and the workforce. That's something that had never been seen before. It's very different from slavery, capitalism, or feudalism. Here, you could own tools and land, but they controlled the power of your labor.
During the dry season, tens of thousands of builders worked tirelessly on the enormous construction of the pyramid. Such a massive structure could have very well crumbled beneath its own weight. To prevent that from happening, a mound-shaped wall was built around the pyramid. The interior of the structure was supported with a grid of cells made of adobe bricks, a mix of straw and clay. The holes were then filled with dirt and rocks. A process that was repeated layer after layer, all the way to the top. This honeycomb structure allowed the building to withstand the heavy weight of the filling within the pyramid.
Construction cells, they were not invented at Teotihuacan, but in Puebla. And the reason why that technique was developed or invented is unknown, but I suspect that around 50 to 70, there was a huge volcanic eruption of Popocatépetl. And I assume there was a huge earthquake. And it is possible that many structures were destroyed. Then those people possibly experimented using different techniques and then finally invented the technique of construction cells. So to keep those pyramids stable, Teotihuacan people emulated or imitated those techniques.
The Pyramid of the Sun is the mightiest structure ever built by manpower alone. How long did it take the Teotihuacano people to build it? No one really knows. Although many archaeologists share similar beliefs about the answer, a recent experiment has shed new light on the conversation. The construction of a miniature temple using the same tools and materials from back then.
We completed the whole process in 2 weeks with 4 workers. And the most intriguing thing I learned through this process is that we try to keep the walls flat, but actually we failed. It was not possible for us. I still do not understand how Teotihuacan people did it, especially for large buildings. So based on our experiments, I calculated the time necessary to complete the Sun Pyramid, and I think it took less than 10 years, and possibly around 6 years, which is much less time than previously thought.
An achievement that continues to impress and puzzle archaeologists some 2,000 years later. How could the same people who built such structures disappear without leaving behind any clues about their identity? South of the Avenue of the Dead, beneath the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent, is the second main sanctuary in Teotihuacan. 15 meters below the surface, a mysterious tunnel that was discovered in 2003 could unravel the mystery. Entirely carved out with rudimentary tools, this man-made cavity is covered in a thin layer of mud and follows an east to west orientation. The tunnel stretches over 102 meters. 15 meters from the entrance, a series of 23 walls, each 1 meter thick, were built to block access into the tunnel.
The tunnel was sealed 3 separate times, with walls that go from the floor to the ceiling. Then they would destroy the walls to get inside again, but we don't know for what purpose. And then they'd rebuild new walls on top of the remains of the old walls. Later they came back, but for some reason they left without rebuilding the walls. Instead, they filled the tunnel with lots of dirt and rocks. My theory is that for a period of time, the end of the tunnel was used to store the remains of someone specific, someone with a lot of power, most likely a first-era leader of Teotihuacan.
Could this tunnel have been the tomb of the Teotihuacan kings? For the first time, archaeologists seem to be close to solving the puzzle. At the end of the first section, which is 65 meters long, the narrow tunnel suddenly drops.
The majority of the tunnel's first section was dug about 15 meters below the surface. And this here is deeper. It goes down to 17 meters. I think this whole section must have been how they accessed what we believe to be the most sacred and important spot of the entire tunnel. I believe it's the gateway to the real world, the truth, and the real underworld.
An intriguing sparkle in the rock attracts the eye, a phenomenon that's far from natural.
The entire tunnel must have been covered with this sparkling mineral powder. It's made of 3 minerals, pyrite, hematite, and magnetite, which were brought here from far away and painted on these walls, the ceiling, and even the floor of the tunnel. It must have been an extremely important religious experience to enter here in total darkness, with only the light from your torch. As the flame flickered, it must have looked like the sky and the stars of the underworld.
At the end of the tunnel, 3 chambers facing east, south, and north form a cross, the center of which is perfectly aligned with the peak of the pyramid. This imaginary vertical axis is called the axis mundi.
There's a symbolic conduit here that connects all 3 levels of the cosmos. The entire world rotates around this vertical axis. What continues to amaze us is how the Teotihuacanos, this deep, were able to precisely calculate how to perfectly align this point with the summit of the pyramid of the feathered serpent.
Although no tomb was discovered here, archaeologists did make another incredible discovery. 4 stone statues representing 3 women and a man, all facing the axis mundi.
We discovered the remains of another sculpture, much larger than the 4 others. It appears to have been a male figure. It was naked, like the others, but all we found at this spot was a foot, and 100 meters further, a leg. We believe that means that when the Teotihuacanos came into this place, likely to desacralize the tomb of the man who was buried here, they also destroyed this sculpture, which likely represented him. From what we know, the Teotihuacanos were iconoclastic. They destroyed the symbols of power associated with a person at the time of their death.
Sacred rituals must have been carried out here. Rituals like this king's ceremonial burial. A man whose influence spanned far beyond the city's borders.
When the funeral ceremony took place, the entire Mesoamerican world sent gifts, presents to accompany the dead king that was buried here. It must have been a very important event that affected the entire Mesoamerican world.
Although the name of this king has forever been forgotten, The tens of thousands of offerings left in the tunnel could provide important insights into the Teotihuacan civilization. They include objects made of jade or amber, as well as finely carved shells, many of which share something in common. They're all from Maya civilization.
There is nothing specific to Teotihuacan here. Everything is 100% Maya. We've been able to decode them thanks to similar artifacts found on Maya sites that are much older than Teotihuacan. This glyph is very important. It means Ahau, and Ahau means king. It's most likely connected to the structure of power in Teotihuacan. That's why I think that the Mayas greatly contributed to the creation of the ideology, the magical thinking, and the religious identity of Teotihuacan. The Teotihuacanos didn't create any myths. They just borrowed the myths of the ancient Mayas. And then they presented themselves as the creators and the masters of the world. But in reality, all the origins of this is Maya.
The Mayas, a people long considered to be pacifistic, but who also practiced human sacrifice. Was the Teotihuacanos' insatiable thirst for blood inspired by the Mayas? One thing is certain. This pyramid, the last structure that completed the historical heart of the city, saw more bloody ceremonies than any other edifice. Located at the far north of the Avenue of the Dead, surrounded by 14 other pyramid structures, lies the city's third key religious sanctuary, the Pyramid of the Moon. 46 meters high, 149 meters wide, and 168 meters deep, it is built on multiple levels connected by monumental staircases. It has been heavily explored since the first Central American expeditions, and 345 meters of tunnels have been dug here in hopes of unraveling its secrets. The excavations revealed incredible discoveries.
The Moon Pyramid was constructed over a sequence of time. So imagine an onion. It started off as a small dirt mound, and then they built over and over until it became larger and larger. And so we know from doing tunnel excavations at the core of the pyramid that there were 7 building phases.
The first pyramid, which is only 23 meters wide, was designed to support the second, and the second supported the third. This system allowed to limit the amount of backfill needed for each step. In total, 7 pyramids were built over 3 centuries at the northern limit of the Avenue of the Dead.
One of the most important kind of dimensions of the city was the front of the Moon Pyramid itself. It always had to start from that point because this point to, for example, the end of the Avenue of the Dead was a certain number of measurement units. And so that's why they decided that they always have to have the pyramid start from this section.
The Avenue of the Dead is 2,156 meters in length, which corresponds to 2,600 Teotihuacan measurement units, meaning 10 times the number of days on the ritual calendar. Striving to preserve the exact length of the Avenue of the Dead, the Teotihuacanos gave the Pyramid of the Moon a very particular shape.
Originally, it was a kind of mound that grew 3 times. When they build the 4th construction pyramid, it becomes much larger. It becomes what we know as a monumental scale, right? So when they decided to add an adosada structure, that's a next platform on top of the main body of the pyramid, they decide to cut the edges of the smaller mound and then build another main pyramid behind it because that front had to be maintained. So they're building over from the front into the back.
An important religious symbol, the Pyramid of the Moon was key to the strategy adopted by the leaders of Teotihuacan. to make this city the most popular site of pilgrimage in Mesoamerica.
You could consider Teotihuacan the great Mecca of Mesoamerica. That's why we think this large street, the Avenue of the Dead, which is over 70 meters wide, was designed to receive thousands of people from all over Central America.
You could imagine that on certain occasions, you would have parades where people will be looking onto the avenue, all of the people walking into the dedicatory space. The conch shells, you could hear them in the background, but also the screeches and the roars of the pumas and the eagles.
And this would blow them away. I mean, all those things painted now. And they would go back and be impressed and take some, Teotihuacan influences with them.
These pilgrims spread the word of Teotihuacan's grandeur across all of Mesoamerica. Thousands of them journeyed here to partake in lavish ceremonies that marked the start and end of each phase in the construction of the Pyramid of the Moon. Rituals during which jaguars, pumas, eagles, or even humans were sacrificed. The great priest would finish off his victims by ripping out their hearts. The corpses were then buried in one of 6 burial chambers within the pyramid's filling, all precisely aligned along a north-south axis.
The way that they are arranged within the dedicatory space is very important, both its orientation, but also the quantity. Certain numbers keep reappearing. For example, certain calendric numbers, like the number of days, months of years. The number 18 comes up significantly. It's the number of golden eagles that were sacrificed in burial 6. Half of this number, 9 were sacrificed in burial 2. I think so far, everything about Teotihuacan is intentional. It's just incredible to think about how they were able to conceive of such a master plan and not only think about it, but execute it.
It was these 3 sanctuaries that made Teotihuacan the most important religious center in all of Mesoamerica. And yet, barely 2 centuries after its rise, the city underwent a new revolution. In 200 AD, Teotihuacan counted over 150,000 inhabitants, making it the most populated city in Mesoamerica. On either side of the Avenue of the Dead and its lavish temples, entire neighborhoods sprang from the earth. These residential complexes, much like the Great Pyramids, were subject to very strict rules of construction.
The entire city was built around the cosmovision of Teotihuacan, the 4 cardinal points, north, east, west, south, and also in relation to the sun's position on certain dates. The first city was oriented 11 degrees east of the magnetic north. And when I say city, I don't mean only the main road, the Avenue of the Dead, and its temples. I also mean all of the structures, all of the walls, the entire city.
Tens of thousands of dwellings that the new king wanted to tear down as the ruler wanted to impose a radical change to the city's interpretation of cosmogony. Reorient the city 15.5 degrees east of magnetic north. A change that would lead to a large part of the city being destroyed and rebuilt to fit the new layout.
It was insane as destroying Paris, Rome, or New York City, simply to reposition everything by 3 degrees, which isn't even noticeable.
This is a tremendous amount of planning, engineering, and infrastructure to get it right. Remember, they didn't have the total stations we have today to make sure that alignment is completely accurate. And the people residing in these locations didn't just squat down. And so it's amazing to think about as far as what it took to convince the already settled people to reorient, because it's not just reorienting a building, it's reorienting the way that you walk, the way that you have access in and out to the city center and in, right? Getting your way to the marketplace. It orients your daily life in a very fundamental way.
How could one king, as powerful as he may have been, impose such a radical change upon his people? The answer lies perhaps within the structure of the living quarters itself, an iconic part of the city. Surrounded by a perimeter wall that limited access, each complex included living spaces, storehouses, workshops, and most importantly, a courtyard with an altar. A central element controlled by the priests, where domestic religion was practiced.
The priests controlled the production of all objects made in this space. They distributed the raw materials and collected many of the finished products, which then they offered to the city's elites. The weight of the local religion was felt on every level. It was everywhere, whether you were at home or in the biggest temples. It was one of the ways that the elite controlled the broader population.
Like the Great Pyramids, the entire city was painted in red pigment extracted from a stone, hematite. In the luxury dwellings reserved for the elite, walls were decorated with ornate frescoes of scenes strictly controlled by the state.
The principal theme was this mountain. It's an allusion to the Tlaloc, the god of the rain, the most important god in Teotihuacan. For example, in this part, we see what appears to be a depiction of a sacrifice. There are also decapitated heads. It's obvious that this is more than a simple decorative painting. It is also a clear representation of the Teotihuacano cosmovision. One of the ways they controlled the people was by conveying the state's messages in stone.
2,200 living quarters spread across 23 square kilometers and overtook land that had once been used for farming. To continue to grow their city, the leaders of Teotihuacan made what could be considered a surprising decision.
Around 150 AD, they closed all of the hydraulics, which required great effort, and they stopped cultivating their own food. Why would Teotihuacan stop its own food production? The Teotihuacan Valley is actually very small, so even if they had dedicated all the available land to agriculture, that still wouldn't have been enough to feed a population greater than 30,000 people. But there were 200,000 men and women living in Teotihuacan, which means that most of the food consumed in the city was imported.
A dependence that could become the city's Achilles heel. The Teotihuacanos made a very risky bet and decided to make the city the largest artisanal production center in Mesoamerica. To that end, they shifted their focus to a strategic resource that was widely available in the valley: obsidian. A volcanic rock with exceptional physical properties.
Obsidian is a volcanic rock with very sharp edges. It was the only material they could use to make blades for sacrifices or weapons. We believe there were numerous workshops in the city that were dedicated to making objects out of obsidian. We know that obsidian played an extremely important role in the city's economy, and we found obsidian artifacts in other places far away from Teotihuacan.
Now the greatest economic power in Mesoamerica, Teotihuacan attracted traders from all over Central America. Entire neighborhoods of foreigners began to spring up. The Zapotec neighborhood, located 3 kilometers west of the Avenue of the Dead, was specialized in the production of stucco. In the northwest, there was a neighborhood that regrouped people from the Veracruz region and the Maya lowlands.
Today, Teotihuacan would have been a multi-ethnic city, like New York City or Paris, where people from all over the world dress and speak in a variety of ways.
It seemed like nothing could stop the incredible growth of the city. A regional power up until then, Teotihuacan was about to take a new step in its quest for domination. The year was 200 AD. In the Valley of Mexico, Tlaxcala and Cuilco, Teotihuacan's biggest competitors, started to crumble. No one really knows why. And yet, at the same time, construction on a new pyramid in Teotihuacan seemed to mark the end of a battle, of which the city emerged victorious.
When the construction of the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent was set to begin, a massive sacrifice of 260 people took place. It's possible that they were prisoners of war or rival leaders who were brought here and sacrificed. They were placed at the base of the structure, hands tied behind their backs. They were all taller than average. They all had weapons and were adorned with warrior symbols.
Did this mass sacrifice signify a change in the Teotihuacan power structure? Built directly above the old tunnel, this new pyramid was dedicated to Quetzalcoatl, the powerful feathered serpent.
The feathered serpent brings this emblem of time and the creation of new time on its back. And the way that this was materialized is by embedding a whole military army within the nucleus of the structure where this feathered serpent is meandering on its frontal facade, right? So it's a very powerful message that reflects the arrival of new rulership.
A new sovereign had thus taken control of the city. An authoritarian leader whose goal was to make Teotihuacan the first empire of Mesoamerica. The new pyramid was meant to surpass everything that had been previously built. To do so, architects had to adapt a new style: talud tablero. This style uses an inward sloping wall, the talud, to support a vertical slab that's perpendicular to the ground, called the tablero. This technique created significant areas of ornate facades that further served the state's propaganda.
The Feathered Serpent Pyramid was very innovative at that time period because of the integration of three-dimensional sculptures with a building. Originally, those sculptures were painted with a lot of different colors, including green, white, black, and also yellow. Usually, Mesoamerican pyramids were painted in just one color. So I can imagine that those viewers were highly impressed, because they had not seen the same thing before. We think that those Teotihuacan elites wanted to impress people by inventing something new, which is associated with the new order established with the building of this pyramid.
Carved out of heavy blocks of andesite, the sculptures seem to float on the sides of the building, an illusory effect created by an ingenious system.
In order to integrate three-dimensional sculpture into the building, they invented a new technology called tenon sculpture. So here we see the serpent head, and this part is called a tenon.
In order to suspend the heavy rock, a cantilever on one end of the stone is slid into a hole in the side of the facade. Within the pyramid, a chamber made of heavy stone holds up the sculpture by counterbalancing its weight.
So that sculpture does not fall. This was unique in Mesoamerica, and we don't see the same technology before and after Teotihuacan.
Previously conducted in a highly intimate setting within the tunnel, the rituals for the transmission of power now took place in public. To that end, the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent was incorporated into an architectural complex of over 160,000 square meters, designed as an enormous stage, La Citadella. Surrounded by a 9-meter-high platform, this closed, watertight space was made to carry out an incredible spectacle at the arrival of the rainy season.
The myth we're told about ancient times, which no one can remember, was that there was only water, only the sea at first. Thanks to divine intervention, a sacred mountain rose up from the sea. That moment marked the start of the calendar and the passing of time. We have proof that the Teotihuacanos flooded the square. It was their way of representing the primitive sea from which the sacred mountain had arisen.
More than just a city, Teotihuacan now embodied a myth, the original place where the universe was created. Its influence stretched far and wide, from the Maya lands in the south to the northernmost limits of the Mexican territory. An empire, the size of which would forever remain unmatched in Mesoamerica. Everyone thought Teotihuacan had become the supreme city.
The square was huge. According to our calculations, around 100,000 people must have participated in the rituals. We think it wasn't simply a ritual to mark the passing of power among leaders in Teotihuacan. It might have also been used by other governments and perhaps even Maya kings, who came here when it was their turn to be anointed.
Ruler of Copan pilgrimed to Teotihuacan to become enthroned as king of Copan. Kinishashkukmo was at Teotihuacan and went back and became the ruler of Copan. So it was an important voyage, a religious voyage, to create your identity as the ruler himself.
In 5 centuries, Teotihuacan had in turns become a popular pilgrimage site, then the biggest city in Mesoamerica, and finally an empire. A city built by hundreds of thousands of men from all over Central America, all convinced they were carrying out the work of the gods. And yet, in 650 AD, although no major construction had been undertaken in over 2 centuries, dissident voices seemed to rise over the city.
Here we're standing at the intersection of multiple streets. You can see the sides of various residential complexes. Suddenly, the roads were made narrower, and surveillance buildings were put into place to control who could access the various complexes. It seemed like the elite were trying so hard to control the lower-class people that the latter probably began to rebel. We think that conflict began to grow between the 2 social classes.
The repressive measures provoked the anger of the Teotihuacanos. A wave of violence started to spread in the city streets.
It was violent, there's a lot of burning, and particularly I'm talking about the ceremonial center, right? We have a lot of evidence of burning in various areas. So I do think it had to do with a collapse with the central authority itself. That is probably quite spectacular because think about the scale, and these are not wooden structures, right? So it would have required a lot of planning and a lot of resources to complete the level of burning that we see in the city itself.
The elite overthrown, Teotihuacan became no more than an empty shell, and its religious center collapsed into a pile of ashes. The city's residents fled.
We have proof that certain places were abandoned very suddenly. We found grindstones that they used to grind grain. And when we removed them, there was still cornmeal residue on them. The people must have fled quickly, leaving behind anything heavy, taking with them only what they could carry. The migrants who had been living in Teotihuacan returned to their native homelands, taking with them the sole prestige that came with having lived in the greatest and most powerful city that had ever existed in Mesoamerica.
Deserted, Teotihuacan fell into oblivion for centuries. But this incredible city has not finished telling its story. Rediscovered by the Aztecs in the 13th century, it's become a place that touches anyone lucky enough to visit its Great Pyramids. After all, Teotihuacan is the birthplace of the gods.